Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack, and Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. It's been a little while since we recorded a news episode, Stuart, so I know you've got lots of stories to bring us today. But since we were last virtually together, well, I've had a milestone birthday and you've been in Cannes, I think. Why were you in Cannes, flouncing around Cannes? What were you up to?
I mean, that's basically it, flouncing around Cannes. No, I went to Paris for one conference and then went to Cannes for a different one. So I've been kind of hot-tailing it around France. So yeah, the Paris one was a music industry conference, I did a talk about like artist challenges in the modern era. And then I say this in a loving way, it was the most French conference you could have. Like there'd be a panel where they go, what is the new artist entrepreneur? And someone would go, well, we should discuss the words entrepreneur first. It was very, very, it was wonderfully French in that way. And then Cannes was a TV industry conference where I do different work. I work on the magazines. So I've been in the TV world for a week, sort of moonlighting.
Right.
Yeah.
Was there anything at the Parisian conference? Because they're very protective of the French music scene. Did you pick that up? Because one of the things that the Music Venue Trust over here have been talking about is the 3.5% levy that they have on tickets so that they can help fund French music and music at grassroots level.
Yeah, it was interesting because there's a few things going on in France. So one thing is that there's a load of French artists high in the charts doing really well, and they're quite excited about that. The domestic scene is really strong. But there's also worries about not enough people are paying for streaming, and they're really trying to kind of boost that and persuade people that it's worth paying for. So it's kind of, but yeah, and there was some politicians there talking about support for the industry. Yeah, it was quite positive.
Excellent.
And I also there's some bands. It's one of those ones where they have bands playing as well. But I didn't get to see anyone. But there were loads of up and coming French bands, and big queues outside the venues. Lots of young people looking kind of enthusiastic. It was a good event. But how was the big birthday? Because that's what I was wondering about while I was away.
Yeah, well, yes. Well, I turned 60, which I mean seems inconceivable to me that I'm 60, and how did we get here? I mean, particularly given that I still approach life like someone in their mid-30s tops, really. But it did make me realise. I mean, I'm extraordinarily lucky to have some very good friends and people who I've worked with over the years. Some of whom organised a surprise birthday party gig for me last Monday at the Windmill, that little venue in Brixton. And loads of old colleagues and friends, past and present actually turned up, and we had some bands. They got some bands to play as well, including Idlewild opened and played 6 songs. And then 86 TVs did a turn with Rebecca Lucy Taylor joining them for a version of her hit, I Do This All the Time. And then Hamish Hawke did a set to finish, and as I say, it was all completely unexpected and quite overwhelming. Really, I always say I was moist of eye on many occasion. But also, I warn you, I think I booked about 4 guests for this podcast as well during the course of the evening. I tell you what, though, because I didn't realise this until a few weeks ago, but you get a senior rail card at 60s. So that was one of the first things I did on my birthday was buy a senior rail card, and then the next thing I did was I purchased all the train tickets I needed to follow Fat Dog around on tour in a couple of weeks' time, because I'm going off with Fat Dog for I think 2 or 3 days, depending on how it's going. And I don't know how Fat Dog will feel about this. The fact that every night they look down and there I am standing sort of slightly left of the front of the stage. Because did you see that story which involved the Pretenders? And obviously it's not blatantly about money, but money sort of plays a part in this, as it kind of highlights, I guess, the new wave of superfan, which the industry is getting increasingly interested in. But did you see that Chrissy Hine from Pretenders was asking fans who are following them around on tour to let local people sit at the front of their gigs? So they weren't confronted with the same front row at their shows every night, because obviously they must have fans who are going to a number of dates on their tour, and the band didn't want to look down and see the same people looking up at them every night. Which I mean, it was an interesting. I mean, it raised some hackles amongst their fans. I mean, it was quite apologetically written, but it did appear to anger some of their loyal following, who quite right, I guess, are basically saying, look, I've spent a lot of money to come and watch you on consecutive nights. Thanks very much. So I think, if anything, I'm the one who deserves to be down the front. That would be
It's
the
difficult, isn't
argument.
it? Yeah, because you can see both sides of it, can't you? You can see superfans, because those superfans are the ones who spend so much money on you. You need to
Yeah.
hold them close as an artist. But at the same time, if your front row is locked up with the same people, it does mean other people aren't getting to go there. And I can sort of see both sides. If you're one of the local fans, you might be quite pleased that you get a chance to go in the front row, mightn't you? But
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it is, as I say, it's another piece of evidence really pointing to the existence of, this what they're dubbing the super fan who wants, who loves a band so much they will spend a lot of money on them, including going to see them on more than one occasion on tour. We had a listener actually once. We will get to the actual news, everybody, in a second. But we had a listener to our Six Music show who we gave the nickname Adrian 72 times because he'd been to see U2 72 times. And
that's a lot of money too, isn't it?
it's
Goodness.
a lot, and not just in the UK either. And then, I don't know, it must have been about 18 months after we'd mentioned him on the programme that I was at the bar at a gig in North London, and this chap came up and said, "Oh, Steve, I'm Adrian, the U2 fan." And I said, "Oh, you're Adrian 72 times." To which he replied something like, "It's 93 now."
It's going to,
Anyway, I went.
do you think Fat Dog listened to this podcast? Because it's going to be really funny if they go, right, Lemac at the back. We need someone else front left this gig.
Yeah, you're allowed one go at the front. I wonder what Adrian 93 times would make of Bono telling him whether to vacate his front row seat. Anyway, I'm sure there'll be more about the importance of the super fan in weeks to come. Today, though, what have we got today? Well, we've got a triumphant story from the coffers of the PRS. We'll also attempt to find out if Lily Allen's claim that she can make more money selling photos of her feet than she can from her streaming royalties. We'll see what we can find out about that. And we have an entertaining Fred Durst from Limp Bizkit story. Words I never ever thought I'd say. But let's start with this then. So Björn from ABBA and Thom Yorke are among more than 10,000 signatories of a statement warning artificial intelligence companies over unlicensed use of their work. Well, I say 10,000 signatures. It was 10,000 when the story first broke, but then I noticed on the socials last night, I think the number of people who have signed this petition to the AI companies, I think it's up to, is it around about 28,000 people now have lodged their concerns, I think, so far.
Yeah, it's one of those moving targets that kind of makes everyone look silly who writes about it in a moment in time, because the next day it's 4,000 or 5,000 more. But yeah, 28,500 might be 30,000 by the time people hear this podcast, because it's been growing rapidly.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So where did this start, and what sort of impact do you think it might have with the powers that be?
Yeah, so it's the latest kind of example of the music industry saying we don't think artificial intelligence companies should train their models on our work without paying us and licensing it. And it's a really short statement. Like, it's not like a big long letter like some of these things are. It's literally one sentence, which is: the unlicensed use of creative works for training generative AI is a major unjust threat to the livelihoods of the people behind those works and must not be permitted. So very short and snappy. And it kind of follows on from, there was an open letter in April actually in the US that the likes of Stevie Wonder and Billie Eilish and Chuck D and Nicki Minaj signed. So it's not the first example of this, of artists speaking, but I think that's the important thing about it. It's musicians. It's not music. Music industry companies are also on there.
Yeah.
But I remember a few months ago when record labels sued these two AI music companies, you remember Suno and Udio, the kind of two big. And the CEO of Suno, wrote this blog post, and he was quite punchy, and he talked about like the corporate record labels resorting to like their old lawyer-led playbook. So kind of that idea of the music industry being scared of new tech and suing it rather than working with it. And that was kind of his message. And I think when artists get involved, it pushes back on that. It's not corporate record labels. It's artists you love, individual creators. Like, it's Thom Yorke. It's not Universal Music Group only. It's,
Yeah.
So that's part of it, I think. It's like it's an attempt to make sure that people understand it's not just big music companies having to go about this. It's individual artists who feel threatened and worried.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
And the
one of the things I found interesting is there a certain rowing back here though from Bjorn from ABBA? Which one of ABBA was it that said? Was it Bjorn who said a while ago? You know, we've all been trained on the music we listen to. ABBA's AI was partly trained on the Beatles, so artists will admit, you know, they are influenced by other artists, and AI is sort of doing that in a way.
Yeah, he's spoken about AI quite a lot actually, and he's president of this industry body, CSAC, which is like the Collecting Society's big body, and so he writes his intro to the report, and he's talked about AI in I think the last two or three, and he is very open to it. He uses it, he likes it, he credits his influences, but at
Mm,
the same time he says, but actually, commercial companies whose goal is to make money, just scraping all the music and training their models on it without asking anyone, he does still see that as different in a kind of ethical sense, if that
yeah,
makes sense. So it's kind of, but
yeah,
yeah, so he's been quite explaining. But it's I mean, the other thing I think here is that, and I had a conversation recently with someone who worked as a lobbyist in America for the music industry, and they said what really cuts through when you're talking to politicians and policymakers about we want some new laws, we want something done, is if you've got the artists on board. Because if you're talking to some politician, be it in the US or here, and you're saying we'd like you to do this, we'd like you to kind of ban AI from doing that, and it's music industry companies asking you, or if you can say, look, you love Radiohead, don't you? Tom Yorke agrees with this. Or you love Stevie Wonder. He thinks this is a terrible idea and we
mm,
should change. So it's one of those things of bringing it down to the humans who the policymakers love and might be swayed by. And I think that's part of
yeah,
this too. It's saying, look, so but it's one of those things like saying you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't use our work without permission. The problem is that some of these companies have done it already. They've scraped all the music already, trained their models on it, and it's kind of a bit barn door flapping, if that makes sense. Like it's
mm,
happened already, but the industry still sees a value in saying we don't agree to this, we don't want it, we don't like it, and by saying it in the future, if we get these new laws we want to kind of stop this happening, we can say, look, we said it at the time we didn't want this to happen, and you still did it. So it's kind of setting things up for future discussions and future kind of legal issues too. But yeah, it's a lot
yeah.
of people, and it's gathering momentum. You know, it was announced, like you say, with 10,000, 28,500 now. People are really piling in and saying, yes, we want to put our name to this and agree with it.
Okay. Next up, exports of British recorded music grew by 7.6% in 2023 to a record high of £775 million. This, now, I found this interesting, given that, you know, there's been some concern during the course of this year that British music over here is being overrun by imports. Because wasn't there a week not so long ago when less than 30% of the top 40 were actually homegrown acts, I think. So,
Mm.
but while that's happening, we're still seeing our artists doing better overseas. Is that right?
Ki-
About right?
Kind of, yeah. Although it's one of those stories where the positive numbers mask something a bit more worrying for the industry, which is what they
Right.
talked about. So yeah, so it's like I say, it's a record high, up 7.6% year on year. And this is like basically British music making money elsewhere in the world. So
Yeah.
streams, sales, that side. But in 2022, this growth was like 20%. So the actual rate of growth is more than halved. Actually, it's like a third nearly.
Mm.
Um, and the BPI, when it announced it, made a point of saying that in 2015, the UK's share of like global audio streams was 17%, and now it's less than 10%. So the story here is like record revenues, but Britain's share of global music listening is falling, and they're worried about that, and they're worried about the slowing in growth. And in the announcement, there was, and like you say, some of the debate this year, the announcement made a point of referring to like South Korea as a good example, where K-pop's been doing really well, and that is partly because people have been streaming it around the world, and people like BTS and Blackpink have been. But also, South Korea has a really strong government-backed agency that supports exports for Korean culture.
Mm.
So there's a lot of support from the government financially, and so the BPI's point was they're doing really well. They've got this support. We'd like more of that because otherwise we're losing our share. So it was weird, like record numbers, but we're worried about things going down. We're worried about losing our. And I sort of I feel a bit. Well, let me try this argument out on you because it's kind of a tough argument to make. I
Okay.
wonder if it's not a terrible thing globally if like more money and more streams are going to music from other parts of the world than the UK and US, which were kind of traditionally the two big dominant exporters, and I guess
Mm,
Sweden as well a bit. Like in a way, what's happening is music from Nigeria, Afrobeats, music from South Korea, K-pop, music from Latin America is all gaining at the expense of British music. But that's kind of, as a listener, maybe not such a bad thing. You know, the world is more varied and there's more success
mm,
coming from all over the place. But at the same time, I do understand why, if you're the music industry in the UK, you worry about that and say, well, actually, we want to be able to fight on equal terms. We want to be able to kind of get more support, get a bit more money behind exports. It's like a hard message, really. But I
mm.
think it's arguably good for listeners that there's music coming from all kinds of places. But it is something that the BPI, the labels body, is saying we'd like more help now to make sure we can continue to compete on this global level.
But I think one of the things is it's at least, I mean, provoking this conversation and the stats now has made people wake up to the fact that the UK, and I guess America to a certain extent, but taking it from our angle, the UK, we don't have a divine right to sell our music to people
Mm,
just because we have, led the world in musical terms for quite a long time, or been one of
mm,
the world leaders in pop music and its creation. That doesn't necessarily mean that we always have that right to hold that position. And there has been a certain element of complacency. I mean, it will take a politician talking to a room full of record companies, what, less than 3 minutes to spout off a bunch of figures about how amazing British music is and the
mm.
export of British music and how it's one of our biggest industries and it's envied around the world. Well, it has been, but if you're not going to encourage creativity with support from government and other places, investment from the labels in British artists, money to help British artists abroad, then then we won't be competing in the way that we used to. I think
Yeah.
that at least is a good conversation to have.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's a tough time to be asking for more money from government. Like I think all the headlines this last week have been about how the Labour Party saying how terrible the economy has been and how they're going to have to cut all kinds of stuff and you know purse strings and all that. But at the same time, compared to something like I don't know the NHS, the
Yeah.
money that the music industry feels will be meaningful to help it is a drop in the ocean. So they will have hopes that the government says, yeah, actually, we do see there's an argument here for us to invest a bit more, support you. And I mean, the other thing as well is all these other musics, K-pop, Afrobeats, reggaeton. There's opportunities for collaboration there, aren't there, for British artists? Like British artists could work with artists from those countries and
Mm.
do some really good creative stuff. It's not just about making money. So there's some opportunity in the fact that people are coming from other parts of the world and having success globally. I think there's some good opportunities for the UK music industry too, if we can
Mm.
forge those links and get artists together.
I mean,
But
this
yeah,
this 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 next story follows on quite well, doesn't it? Actually, because
mm,
this is about money being invested in, and not coming from government. It's coming from PRS here. But there was a new report last week which outlined the impact of the PRS Foundation's International Showcase Fund. Which this is all about. Again, it's about exporting or supporting the export of British music and helping artists to be able to go out and tour different territories.
yeah, and it's all about those showcases, isn't it? So those international festivals where you can go and kind of show yourself off to local bookers and fans alike. And yeah, so this is this fund, which is run with I think it's the government, an Arts Council England, and the British Councils. There's a few different people involved, and PRS Foundation. And I think they said that in between 2019 and 2024, it helped generate £6.7 million for the UK's economy, and that for every pound invested in it, British artists are making £5.40 back in revenues. So
Right.
it's one of those schemes where you like, if you put this much money in, we get this much more back, and artists do well. And I think they did some survey of those artists, and I think 93% said it helped them reach new audiences around the world.
Mm.
And again, there's that message of here's a good thing, here are some positive stats, but we need more. And I think PRS Foundation wants to keep the financial support going for this, but also expand it, put more in. And with that argument that if the government backs this with a bit more money, we'll make more money.
Yeah.
And some of these problems the BPI is worrying about, it could help with those too. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, you couldn't, you can't knock funds like this. I mean, you just, as we've discussed in the past, it's so expensive now touring places like America,
Mm,
not just because of the increase in logistical costs, like the prices of flights and accommodation and travel, but just getting yourselves a working visa is increasingly expensive. I'll be really interested to see how many artists decide to, for instance, go to South by Southwest next year, and
mm,
whether they think it's worth the financial gamble of piling a load of money into a trip abroad. And even even when they've spent all their own money, a lot of artists will need some help funding their trip to, well, South by Southwest or any of those, even some of the big European showcase
mm.
festivals like the one recently in at the Reeperbahn, where a lot of people go to showcase to European agents. I mean, we'll see. I have to say, call me cynical, but this is a very good story for PRS though as well. We've had some bad press in the past few months, so they must be relieved that there's some good news to impart here. But anyway, fair play to them and the artists that they've helped. Now then. Do you want to do Lily Allen next? Lily Allen is selling photos of her feet through through OnlyFans, claiming it makes her more money than she accrues from streaming payments for her music. That's selling photos of her feet is better in terms of income than the royalties she gets from places like Spotify. You've been crunching some of the numbers, I think, Stuart.
Yeah, so there's a few things to explain here that I never thought I would explain on anything. So Lillian, yeah, she's been using a platform called OnlyFans, which a lot of people know what it is. Some people are blissfully ignorant, but OnlyFans is a platform. How do I say this? It's historically associated most with porn stars and the adult entertainment industry. It was somewhere as a porn star you could go, get people to pay you a monthly subscription fee, and they get your photos and the videos, and they can message you. And that was historically its real core audience was adults entertainment. But it has expanded beyond that to kind of influencers, to kind of Instagrammers. It was a way of them to make money. And even some musicians. So like Cardi B used it for a while, Iggy Azalea, Chris Brown. So some musicians have seen this as I can go to this place, people can pay me and they'll get my photos and videos they won't get on Twitter or Instagram. Not necessarily adult photos, just, with musicians, it's kind of exclusive stuff. Anyway, feet are really big on OnlyFans. Okay.
Right.
And I know this not because I'm massively into the OnlyFans feet economy, but there are in fact, there was a big Guardian article in the summer that was about how much money people were making by putting photos of their feet on OnlyFans. And I think it sparked up and down the country all these kind of Guardian readers looking at each other going, do you think my feet could be big on OnlyFans? But Lily Allen, and this is again where I have to say I've been researching this. I didn't know any of this before. There's a website called WikiFeet, which is kind of like a rating all the celebrities based on how nice their feet are. So they have photos. And Lily Allen has a 5-star rating.
Really?
Officially beautiful feet. Yeah.
Right.
So she has the feet to do this. And so she did. She started, you can pay $10 a month to get pictures of Lily Allen's feet that you don't get anywhere else. And that's been going on for a while. So the new development is I think she tweeted about this and said, by the way, I haven't posted in a while, but you can see my archive of feet pics on OnlyFans. And someone, this being, or whatever it's called now, X, someone popped up with, oh, it's a shame. Imagine being reduced to this, as an artist. And she just kind of clapped back and was like, imagine having nearly 8 million monthly listeners on Spotify, but earning more money from having 1,000 people subscribe to pictures of your feet. So she was like, she's not having any nonsense with people. And so I was doing some crunching of this for our story in Music Hall this morning. So OnlyFans takes 20% of the money you make. So if you have 1,000 fans paying $10 a month, that's $10,000 a month, and you keep $8,000 of it. So that's how much roughly she's making if the 1,000 number is correct.
Right.
And then Billboard did some stats, and it said she's doing around, I think it came out as like about 25.5 million Spotify streams a month.
Okay.
And that should be around $122,000 of money. But the key is that's paid out to her label and a publisher. And so no one knows what the terms of her deal are, whether she's recouped her advances. So in theory, she's getting she's generating 122 grand of payouts from Spotify a month, but no one knows how much she's getting. And then she actually came back on Twitter when someone pointed this out, and she said, yeah, actually, I get a tiny percentage of that money. And I won't explain it all to you now, but that's So that's kind of the thing here. She's one of those artists. I mean, when was she signed? When did she break through? It was the mid-90s, wasn't it? When she broke through?
Later, yeah, a bit later, was it? I think.
Late 90s. So it was in the era of still CD sales, but also some of the deals where if you had a big advance, you'd have to recoup it before getting royalties. And some of the artists in that generation now are saying our deals aren't very good for us in streaming. We're not getting very much money.
Mm.
And a lot of them are turning to entrepreneurial things, doing all kinds of businesses to kind of, well, okay, we're not getting much streaming money, but here's how we think we can make money. And kind of feat is quite a niche, and you need to have the trotters that are good enough for it. But it's kind of just part of that. I think there's like, and I wrote this morning, like a lot of artists from that generation are having to do quite pragmatic things. Say, right, how do I make money? Maybe I teach in a music school. Maybe I do this. Maybe I do this other kind of thing that's nothing to do with music to make money. Like a lot of artists from that era are figuring out ways of keeping their income going so they can carry on making music. And in her case, she's found something that seemingly is working. So,
what you're saying about the contracts, that's the interesting thing. We should do a breakdown with an artist, any artist who would like to come and tell us where the money goes. So if your streaming money is, say, in the region of, say, it's £100,000 pounds a month, how much of that ends up with the artist? Because we know, obviously, a lot of it, and this is one of the reasons why artists are so upset and have been campaigning and we had against how the record companies divvy up the money. Well, I mean, there was a select committee about that. It must be nearly 3 years ago now, but the artists are still saying we're very hard done by through our record deal because so much of the royalty money is going to our record labels or to other people, and then managers will take their percentage as well. So yeah, mate, but it'll be, as you say, be fascinating to know how much Lily Allen actually ends up with at the end of the month.
I know this is not really relevant to the story, but I really like Lily Allen. Like I've always liked her, and she seems smart. She seems practical. She's hustling basically, like artists do. I think it's really interesting because some people are like that idea of like she should be ashamed of being on OnlyFans, which was the original tweet, and her saying no, I'm just this is what's working, and I'm going to do it. I think that's something that's quite. I'm impressed because she could have just kind of not replied and stay quiet, but she was like, I'm not ashamed of this. My feet are good enough to make this money on OnlyFans, and I don't care who knows it. So good on her.
We'll get to our final story about Fred Durst from Limp Bizkit. Is about money. It's about the money that you get from your record deal. There's a great spat here between Fred Durst and Universal Music Group. Just before we get to that, should we quickly mention Two Live Crew? Two Live Crew, the rap veterans, have won a legal battle over their right to regain ownership of their recordings.
Yeah, and it's been a while. You must remember this probably better than I do, but there was a time when Two Live Crew were the most controversial group in the world, weren't they? Because in America, their albums, the kind of people who were cross about rap music and lyrics they were the kind of the poster bit of that. And then now this is all about termination rights, which is something that isn't talked about a lot over here because the US has a different system to us. But basically, termination rights are when, as a musician, you can regain ownership of your work a certain amount of time after you made it. And so for recordings, I believe, and I looked this up, if you made an album after 1978, you can apply for termination, which means it comes back to your ownership 35 years later.
Right.
But you have to do it within 5 years of that date. There's a kind of deadline I'm running on it. And so this is about Two Live Crew wanting to regain control of their works or ownership. And the complicating factor was that their original label went bankrupt in the mid-1990s, and its catalogue was bought by another label called Lil Joe Records. And so the legal question here was, do those termination rights still apply if your catalogue's been bought by someone else because your label went bankrupt?
Right.
It was, and a jury said yes, they still apply. They took Two Live Crew's side. Their lawyer said it was a total and overwhelming victory for our clients and artists everywhere. But the label is going to plan to appeal, and it says no. If you go bankrupt and sell stuff, we shouldn't have to then give it back to the artist in the same way as if we'd recorded it originally.
Right.
But what this is interesting for me for is like this idea of termination rights is worth keeping an eye on because it's one of those rolling deadlines. So every time 35 years has passed, a new set of stuff will come up. So 35 years before 2025, for example, is 1990. And we're getting into like grunge territory there, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're getting into kind of, so an early 90s hip hop as well. Like, so this is going to be something where every year there'll be a new crop of artists who have the right to kind of request this. And that what happens often then is when they do get ownership of their works back, that's when you see them either selling it or striking into a label, bringing out remasters, doing cool stuff with their catalog.
Yeah,
So it's
of course.
kind of it's not just about like it's not just about kind of making money in legal battles. It's about actually what do you do once you've got your music back, and that can be a really exciting moment, I think, for artists because it gives them control and it gives them, in reference to Lily Allen's story, it gives them, much more transparency over how much money their music's making and who gets it.
All right, to finish with then, Limp Bizkit's Fred Durst is suing Universal Music Group, claiming that he and the band are owed millions of dollars in unpaid royalties. Tell us about that. We talked about this off air a little while ago, and your retort about how little Fred possibly knows or understands about how record deals work had me laughing for about 3 days. But what's the upshot of this lawsuit from the Durst?
Well, it turns out he didn't just do it for the nookie. He was hoping to get some money out of it too.
Should have seen that coming.
Yeah, sorry. I'm always happy to do shit puns. Yeah, but actually, this is an interesting story. He's suing Universal Music Group for more than $200 million in damages, saying that despite 45 million sales, he hasn't been paid any streaming royalties.
Oh, really? Right. Okay. Right.
And this is like a serious thing, like because Limp Bizkit, for all you think they were that band of that era, they've got 15.5 million listeners on Spotify, which, for a comparison, will make us both sit here and look at our toes. Sadly, the Black Crowes have got 2.6 million listeners on Spotify, and Fat Dog have got 147,000. So there's no justice. Like combined, they're still like a fifth of Limp Bizkit's listenership. But then, this lawsuit is basically saying, right, we haven't been paid any royalties. Bloomberg covered it quite early, and they said UMG paid the band $43 million in advances.
Whoa,
so,
really?
Yeah, at the time. So there's kind of a question here over, okay, how does the recoupment worked on that? Like, do you remember we were talking about music videos recently? I pointed out that Rollin' was the 10th most expensive music video of all time. I think it was like $3 million at the time. So there is one of those issues here where there was a lot of money and it was spent on stuff, and when it comes to streaming royalties. But the other thing that the lawsuit claims is that Flip Records, which is the original label that signed the band, Fred Durst claims that they've been making millions of dollars through profit sharing with Universal Music and that he's received nothing. So there's also another entity in this. It's about there is money being paid to someone. And so the other thing about this lawsuit is I think the lawsuit literally claims there could be hundreds of other artists in a similar position. So it's one of those lawsuits about one band that threatens to break open a widely held problem. And the Guardian did a good piece talking to like lawyers, and a lot of these lawyers seem to agree. Yeah, this lawsuit is kind of going for the fire and brimstone approach. Like, this is terrible. Loads of artists, because they want a settlement quickly. They want to make Universal Music Group. Yeah, we're going to settle this. We don't want this blowing up into a huge thing. But yeah, so it's but it's weird. It's one of those things. Again, it's that whole era, isn't it? The 90s, where bands were signed. They got huge advances. There was a lot of money rolling around from CD sales still. But in the streaming era, there's just, it's sparking this whole range of legal questions and lawsuits and, how are we being paid now compared to then?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other interesting thing is that a lot of artists, because there was so much largesse in the 90s and because it was the done thing to spend, upwards of £30,000-40,000 on each video that you made and the rest. And there was money thrown at you for touring and various promotions and, hotel for promo and, free limos here and there. And of course, when it seemed like everybody was making money, everything was fine, but no one really noticed how much money was being spent, and that put the bands in debt, which again, fine when, there's money coming in, as you say, through CD sales. As soon as the revenue starts to dry up, it becomes, impossible to then to recoup, to pay off the debt that you accrued when everyone was just flinging money at each other. So, yeah, the profligacy of the age has come back to bite some of those artists from the 90s and early noughties, I think.
I'm just pleased that Fred Durst isn't putting his feet on OnlyFans. Is my one takeaway from this. But it's one of those things like, so I Limp Bizkit aren't my band. But they're clearly a lot of people's band, that many listeners on Spotify. They still, and it's one of those things where, okay, Fred Durst he was a Marmite character, wasn't he, at his peak? But this lawsuit is a serious question. The fact that it's also saying money was being paid to someone and I didn't see any of it. Like, these are important issues. So as much as I kind of would like to joke about Fred Durst, like, this is going to be an important case. And I mean, to go to our regular conclusion, it is more likely to get settled, I think, because this is the kind of lawsuit that could shake all manner of skeletons out of the closet for both sides. So I suspect it'll be settled, but it's definitely not going to be the last time we see a band of that era, saying, "Oi, where's my streaming royalties?" And the label may be saying, "Oi, we paid you this much already."
Yeah. And you still owe us. That's it for this episode. I think we're out of time. Thank you very much for making it this far. I will finish by saying what I always say, which is please do subscribe to the show if you've enjoyed the programme. You can subscribe, of course, in your podcast app. And if you could give us a review and a rating, it only takes a couple of minutes, but it all helps build our profile and get us in front of more people who might find us, who knows, entertaining or informative. And if you found it helpful yourselves and you'd like to support us in other ways, there's also our Patreon page where you can become a Price of Music fan or indeed super fan for as little as £2 a month. And you'll find us at patreon.com/thepriceofmusic. That's where you'll find more details. And finally, if you have a question, anything about the music industry and its finances that's always puzzled you, drop us a line with your query to thepriceofmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, look after yourselves, everybody. Cheerio.